Morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us. We know that you have a lot of questions about the COVID-19 vaccines. You have been sending us a lot of questions and you have been asking us a lot of questions. And today we're going to try and answer as many of those as we possibly can. We have a great group of experts assembled. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce them. We have Dr. Jasmine Marcellin and Dr. David Brett Major, who are both infectious disease experts. They will be jumping in to answer your questions. So thanks to both of you for being here. They're on mute, so we'll acknowledge their thanks. And I have plenty of questions to bring to them in a second. Once again, a quick reminder, this is a live chat. It's for informational purposes only. So if you have any questions specific to your health or your medical condition, you want to direct those towards your primary care provider. Now, there was one guest who I didn't introduce. She's going to go first for us today, and that's Brandis Johansson, who's the nurse manager of one of our COVID units. We wanted to bring Brandis on because she was vaccinated 8 days ago. So as someone who received the vaccine, we wanted to bring you her perspective. So Brandis, thank you for joining us, and just tell us what it felt like, first of all.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me. Well, first of all, it was an amazing experience to be one of the first to get it here at Nebraska Medicine. Overall, the vaccine was very painless. I didn't even know it went in. I actually had to ask the nurse that gave it to me, hey, are we done? And he's like, yes, we're absolutely done. So I didn't even know it was given. Obviously the first day after getting it, my arm was a little bit sore, very similar, I would say, to an influenza vaccine. My arm continued the soreness for about 2 more days after that. So I had a total of about 3 days of arm soreness. After that, I felt completely fine. I've had no body aches, fatigue. I had none of those symptoms. So I otherwise have felt completely normal and completely fine after getting the vaccine.
So that's kind of the physical side of things. Can you explain the emotional side? Because you've been on the front lines with your staff. So What was that like?
It was extremely emotional. Yeah, me and my team, we've been doing this since the beginning. So we've been doing this we're going on 10 months now of taking care of the COVID-19 population. So for me and my team, extremely emotional. It actually in 10 months, it's one of the first times I felt a lot of hope, a lot of just, energy. And I just felt like it gave us a little more umph behind this because it just finally feels like maybe there's a little bit of a glimmer of hope and light at the end of this tunnel that we've been dealing with. And it was just such an honor and privilege to do it. And we're doing it for the patients we've lost, the patients we continue to take care of. And we want this over just as much as everybody else does.
All right, Brandis, I know you're not going to sit and answer our vaccine Q&A, so we will let you get back to work. Thanks for sharing your experience today. We really appreciate your time.
Well, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Dr. Marcellin, you also received your vaccine just this week. What was that experience like for you?
It was emotional also. The emotions were definitely complicated. I will share that I had a fear and anxiety for needles, and that's something that has always been the case for me, even since I was little. And so I was nervous going into it just because I get nervous before any shots that I get. But I think for me, the nerves and the anxiety took on a different light, or a life of their own, as I considered just the significance of that moment and how many people's lives have been lost, how many people who have become sick or continue to have ongoing impacts from COVID-19 now. I thought a lot about my cousin who passed away earlier in the year, and just, a lot of conversations that I had had with friends, family, different folks around me who had questions and concerns. And the thing I think that was most emotional for me was when I was asked by the nurse who was giving it to me if I consent to receive the vaccine. And at that moment, I really thought about all of the folks who look like me, Black and Brown individuals in the past and today who may not have had the opportunity to give consent before receiving treatments or not receiving treatments. And like all of that was just really emotional. I thought of Henrietta Lacks, a lot, and her cells that were taken from her without her consent, that have gone on to be really beneficial for the world, but still they were taken from her without her consent. And so when I gave my consent, it was really weighted, it was really heavy, but I'm glad that I did.
Dr. Marcellin, you're giving your voice to us not only as an expert and to share your knowledge on basically COVID from a scientific perspective, but the way that you have lent your voice as a Black woman as well has been really valuable to us, and we just really appreciate that, and I want to acknowledge it. Dr. Brett Major, I'm going to go ahead and pull you into the conversation because safety has been a huge question. A lot of people have said, boy, they really pushed this out fast. How do we know if it's safe? What do we know about this? Can you just acknowledge the process and the safety?
I really like actually that people are asking those questions. People should be mindful when they take any medication or vaccine, and this one is no exception. We expect as consumers of health services that processes are deliberate and that they're transparent and that we're well informed of our interests and why we partake of any service in health or otherwise. So I like that the questions are out there. As it happens, both of the approved vaccines, these messenger RNA vaccines, they're exciting. It's the first use in people now of this kind of vaccine, messenger RNA. I have friends who've been working on the technology for years in other settings, mostly in tropical medicine and tropical public health. And so it's great that they have the right use case and they've come forward. Both of these vaccines are being assessed. They're still being assessed in studies that have enrolled about 40,000 individuals each, which means about 40,000 people under close scrutiny have received either the Pfizer or the Moderna vaccine, and they are remarkably effective on the looks that have occurred so far in the trial, and the side effects have been predictable. Folks who get the Pfizer vaccine, about 8 in 10 of them have some mild flu-like symptoms, and almost the same number on the Moderna vaccine certainly feel it on their arm in a way that they can see for a day or two. And so expected adverse effects happen. We've been very fortunate that we have not observed any severe adverse effects beyond what has been reported a little bit in the press, that if you're somebody who has known allergies to vaccination, or who you happens to know that they're allergic to something in the vaccine, if you're somebody who's vulnerable to that in particular, then you need a real risk benefit conversation with your physician. But we've been extremely fortunate how the stars and the universe have aligned, both in the relevance for these products to this emergency, how they've been able to show us and demonstrate the safety and efficacy that we've observed so far in the trials. The funny thing about an emergency use authorization is it's a very deliberate decision that the risk in the emergency, the risk for people who have a lot of exposure or who have particular vulnerabilities that are going to make disease bad, what's happening in the emergency, that those risks with the benefit of the vaccine mean that it's time to use the vaccine purposefully. It also means that we're continuing to collect a lot of data, which is a way that really vaccine science and medical countermeasure, just drug science, has evolved over the last 20 to 30 years. And so this is a good time to engage the technology, to get the vaccine if it's indicated for you, to read the consents carefully from Pfizer and Moderna, and to stay in contact with your physician.
All good background information. Some of the questions that are popping, we're going to go lightning round style now. A lot of people are hearing about a new strain of COVID in the UK, some other potential new strains that may have arrived here. What do we know about the vaccine and if it will still work on all of this? And it's fairly normal for diseases to mutate.
Yeah, it is normal and expected to see viruses mutate. And there are mutations that have been shared about the coronavirus that causes COVID-19. But the vaccines that have currently been developed have been so to develop a response to that one significant protein, that spike protein, that will, as far as the virologists and the scientists who have commented on this, should still be effective against the COVID-19 virus, even despite some of these very minor mutations. Not all mutations lead to big, bad changes.
It
A couple other
does
questions.
bring up the point, though, and I agree with Dr. Marcel, absolutely. But it does bring up the point that to make the best use of a vaccine, it's best if the community decreases the rates. And so we're fantastically fortunate so far with how this has gone with the vaccines. But just what you said, mutations like this are all the more reason why across the board we should still be very aggressive with mask use, physical and social distancing, personal and environmental hygiene, mindfulness of aggregate settings and of when we're ill or others are ill, because the reality is that the lower the community rates are, the less likely mutations are, and perhaps ironically, the more effective the vaccine's going to be at getting you the result that you want in the community, which is us getting back past the pandemic.
A couple of things that people have been really curious about are children and then women who are pregnant or breastfeeding. How long will it take to know if this is safe for kids? And what's the recommendation for women who are pregnant or breastfeeding? Two questions at once.
Okay, so for children, we have ongoing clinical trial that is happening for kids, and I believe it's between the ages of 12 and 18, so teenagers age. And so that's ongoing. We don't have a lot of data for younger children, and I think we're going to need to wait and see. And for pregnant women, pregnant people, and those who may be breastfeeding, there were not enough of those sort of individuals in the trials. In fact, if you had a positive pregnancy test, you were excluded. But we do know that there are a few folks who did become pregnant during the trials. They're being monitored. And so far, the gynecologists and obstetric agencies and organizations are saying that people should have the conversation with their doctors. And if they don't have any other sorts of risk factors or allergic reactions, et cetera, the same sort of conversations, that they should go ahead and consider getting the vaccine.
Since we're on the subject of pregnancy, one of the stories that has been floating around a lot is that this vaccine could potentially cause infertility. Dr. Brett Major, you did a video for us on that. Can you speak briefly to that topic?
So the information that the companies provided to FDA included numbers of individuals who became pregnant, demonstrated their pregnancy in between vaccine 1 and 2, and also people who became pregnant later. So the pregnancies have been occurring. They've been occurring at similar rates. The structural biology, the look at there was some concern in the social media about a particular protein that's on the placenta in particular, and how it might look a little bit like how our bodies might react to coronavirus. But those similarities were very narrow, and the people who do those kinds of projections don't think that there's any real likelihood that we would develop antibodies that would be important in that way. But I think the real answer is pregnancies happened in the trial, and they happened in the trial whether you got vaccinated or not.
Another question that we've heard a lot is for people who have already had COVID-19, can they get vaccinated?
Yeah. In general, it's good to wait a few months before you get vaccinated. So in general, we suggest about a 90-day window. I think that's what CDC is currently saying. That number might change. It's the same if you get a monoclonal antibody. But as we learn more, we may shorten that window, but it's still relevant to be vaccinated. We really do not know yet how many people remain vulnerable for reinfection from coronavirus, and as the virus continues to mature, as it circulates in people. So vaccination remains relevant if you're in the risk group, but generally it's 3 months after the infection.
I think a lot of us are used to getting our flu shots every year. Do we know yet if this is a one and done or a two and done, as the case may be, or will we need to get COVID vaccines every year? Dr. Marcellin?
It's too early for us to tell that. We need to see how it plays out. And as we are vaccinating more folks, we'll get a sense of how long the immunity will last. And then that will help us to determine whether or not we will need to have booster shots and at what time frame we would need to do that.
What's the difference between the two vaccines, and is one of them better than the other?
Dr. Brett Major can jump in here, but I think the main difference is who developed the vaccines. The technology is the same, and that's one of the beautiful things about it. And it really should not matter to individuals which vaccine, which of the two Moderna or Pfizer vaccines that they receive. The important thing is once you start off with one, then you must finish with that series. And so that means if you got, so for example, I got the Pfizer vaccine on Monday. So when I go back in a few weeks for my second injection, then that has to be the Pfizer injection. I cannot use the Moderna injection for that. Other than that, there's not a difference between the two.
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Marcellin. These are the same general kind of vaccine. We may learn over time that there are subtle differences in the way that people respond and hold on to their immunity or the nature of it. But I agree, for the most part, they're similar. One difference that's a logistics difference is that the Moderna vaccine does not have the same temperature requirements for storage. And so if you're somebody in a community that has a very small healthcare facility, if you're somebody months down the road who gets this at a commercial pharmacy, you may be more likely to see the Moderna vaccine because of the ability to distribute it. But in terms of right now, what we know, I think it just does not matter. I agree.
I'm going to throw for a 2-for-1 out there again. What happens if you don't get the second dose? And then also, how long does it take for the vaccine to start to work? You're not immediately immune.
So you do need the 2 doses for you to get to that level of efficacy that we're talking about. When we talk throwing around numbers like 95% efficacious, that's what with the 2 vaccines. So if you get just the first vaccine, there is some protection. It's not the greatest. And so that's why the booster is needed. And so the reason why the vaccines are being rolled out in the way that they are, where people are giving a card and they're getting their appointment that same day for the second shot, is so that people remember to come back for that second vaccine so that they can be the most protected. And generally speaking, with most vaccines, you expect to have some level of protection developing within the 14 days after the vaccination is given. And so we just need to, and that's the reason why we still need to continue with the masking, like Dr. Brett Major said, and the physical distancing and the hand hygiene, because of receiving a vaccine does not mean that you have developed a superpower where you are completely immune to it on day one.
Another logistical question that not science types like me don't know. If you're vaccinated, can you still carry it?
Could you, I generally like all the hard questions to go to Dr. Marcellin, but could you clarify what you mean by carry it? So that
Is
we
it
make sure we're
possible to
responding?
still transmit it through someone else to someone else? Or
Right. So if you're vaccinated, can you become infected? And can that infection be relevant to the possibility that someone else gets infected? I think that's a great question. And there was a little bit of that data in the Moderna vaccine submission to the Food and Drug Administration. And it did suggest that people who got vaccinated not only did they have less disease, and not only did they have less severe disease, just like the Pfizer vaccine, but they also may be shedding less, and so transmitting less. We hope that's the case with vaccines as in general, and it looks like it's that way. The Pfizer vaccine may very well do the same thing, but it's just not the way their data were structured. So we don't know that for sure, but it does look promising that that's the case. But for any vaccine, it is possible to get a breakthrough infection, and of any vaccine of any kind. And for any vaccine of any kind, it is possible to not only get a breakthrough infection, but to transmit it. So that's why we have to do the measures, the universal measures that we talked about in communities. But it also means that it's important to go ahead and get vaccinations that are important, that make it on the schedule, that are recommended for you, and for which you're comfortable and you've consented. It's also important that you presume nothing, and that when you think you're sick, you talk to somebody about it.
Just want to acknowledge the people that are commenting and posting questions live. I am trying to work as many of those in as I can. Our doctors only have limited time, so we will go in and answer as many of those as we can. Also, nebraskamed.com/vaccine also has a Q&A where we have the answers to a lot of these topics. We're talking about the importance of continuing these measures, the things that we all know are so important: washing our hands, wearing masks, and knowing that we're going to have to continue these for quite some time. But how long will it take these vaccinations that are happening to actually have an impact on the number of COVID cases that we're seeing? That's a big question, I know.
It's a huge question. So this is how we need to think about it. First, the vaccines are here, but they're not here for everyone yet. And so thinking about how that's going to roll out, we're hoping and crossing fingers that we can see more widespread vaccination happening across the community by the early spring of 2021. And so at least until then, we certainly have to continue these public health measures. And then, once we get to a critical mass of the country being vaccinated, then we can start to talk a little bit about what that means in terms of the decrease in the number of people who are getting sick and dying from COVID-19. But to be perfectly frank, the things that are going to help to decrease those numbers even today are going to be wearing masks, avoiding large gatherings, especially, it's holiday time and we want to be hanging out with folks during the holiday time. But really the safest way for us to be able to do that is to keep it to our individual households and make sure that we're using hand hygiene and wearing masks if we're not going to be with our households.
Let's go back to some myth busting, if we shall. Dr. Brett Major, I'm going to put this one to you. Is it true that the vaccine will change our DNA?
No. Oh, you want more than that? So
yes, a little bit more than that.
yeah. So DNA in our body, it's the code, right? It's the showing up and going for takeout food and entering in the kiosk what you want to eat. And then the messenger RNA vaccine, that's like the little receipt that gets printed out of the kiosk that you take to the cashier and then doesn't exist anymore. It just gets thrown away. Messenger RNA is designed to degrade. It relates to how we use our code, but it is not our code. And it does not get back into our DNA to change fundamentally our code. It's just not the way that messenger RNA works in the body.
I think that if you equate things to a fast food kiosk, like that's something even I can relate to. So thank you very much. One more myth that I want to touch on before we kind of start working towards wrapping up. And there's been a lot of articles in press about how the vaccine was made and if it contains fetal fragments. Can you explain how that got out there and what the truth of the matter is?
Well, that sounds like a hard question. So you must be asking Dr. Marcelin.
I know either one of you can handle this one.
There are a lot of regulations around the use of fetal tissue. And I did not see anything in the Food and Drug Administration submissions by either of these companies that suggested that they had used any fetal tissue in development. And it's not usual for these particular technologies for that to be the case in the pathway. So I have no idea why people might assert that occurred. I haven't seen anything at all to suggest that, and they would have disclosed it in the submissions to the regulatory agency.
Dr. Marcellin, you spoke just a moment ago about kind of this week and people preparing for the holidays. And we saw our hospital pushed really to the brink in November. And it's been very reassuring to see those numbers go down. But with people gathering, that could be a scenario that could happen again. Could you just kind of speak to the importance of vigilance, knowing this is a time when people want to be together, but they really shouldn't?
Yeah, I totally get it. I'm a family person. I have a big family back home, and we love to gather, and this is our favorite time of year. But it really is concerning because we know that the way that this virus is spread is with close contact with folks. And so if we have people who are going to be gathering in large groups, then there is a possibility that folks will get sick from those gatherings. And that will lead to them needing hospitalization. And so the way that we can avoid that is really trying to limit the sizes of those gatherings to the folks that are within your household, to wearing masks at all times if you happen to be with folks who are not from your household. And I just wanted to take the time to throw out some suggestions for alternatives. So one thing that I did over the Thanksgiving break with my family lives in Dominica. And we got on Zoom together, and my parents and my family, we sat down and we had dinner together. Our time difference was about 2 hours, but we still were able to have dinner. It was the most lovely thing. And we had this conversation throughout all of dinner. Not everybody may have the opportunity to have that virtual gathering, but if your family lives in town and you would like to be able to see them, maybe arranging times for drive-bys where you can, drive past their house, have some horn honking, and get to see each other's faces and talk to each other from a distance. But really gathering inside the homes with this winter the way that it is, it's not necessarily the safest thing, and we just want people to be safe during this holiday season.
Excellent advice.
Yeah,
I like honking horns a
I
lot.
would- Yeah, I would only add to that there are better things to wrap and put under the tree or in a stocking than SARS-CoV-2.
That's for sure. And Dr. Brett Major, just some closing thoughts from you on this is a hopeful conversation. Obviously, it will take time, but just as a scientist, what's it like to see the vaccine here and rolling out?
Well, I take Dr. Marcelin's point, which is spot on, that she said earlier, which is that the vaccine is a great milestone. It is a milestone among milestones, and it is phenomenal to see it. We were fortuitous. We have to all continue to do our part. And the timeline that we've been talking about since this pandemic started, which is probably, if we're fortunate, a vaccine just well distributed by late spring, summer of 2021, is still the timeline that we've stayed on. And it's a great, hopeful reminder that vigilance will be rewarded.
I want to thank you both for your time today, not only on taking the time to answer questions, but both of you have gone above and beyond at looking the content that we're creating for NebraskaMed.com to make sure that all the information that we put out is reliable, that it's science-based, that it is fact-based. And it's just great to be able to talk to both of you about this fantastic news. So thank you for your time and your vigilance.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
You bet. Thanks to all of you for watching. Again, you can go back and watch after this ends from the beginning if you missed any of it, and you can continue to post comments underneath. We'll try and answer those as best we can. Also, a huge Q&A that we're updating consistently at NebraskaMed.com/vaccine. Happy holidays to all of you, and thanks for watching.